Dr. Jayakumar, good morning. I like the last, when you quoted this commentator towards the end of your report, and I read, "It is easy to manufacture a lie and relatively cheap to distribute it widely. To demolish that lie takes intensive effort, and meanwhile, the nature of the internet ensures that it lives, breeds, and reinforces other lies." So my question is, we do know that whether setting up fact-checking sites, you referred to Stop Fake, which we will interview later. It is a very painstaking, very tedious process. For every incorrect report that you try to verify, there'll be hundreds out there. So my question is, it seems to be a losing battle. It takes so much effort, and the effectiveness of this, and this is one of the new recommendations that you propose, some new ones, some old ones. So back to this one about setting up a fact-checking site. How do you see that panning out in Singapore?
Thank you, sir. Is it necessarily really to reinvent the wheel? Because in certain locations and jurisdictions, sometimes depending on pressure applied on it, big entities like Facebook have actually been willing to work with the fact-checking organizations. Germany is an example. And I wonder whether there might be a case for saying behind-the-scenes discussions are necessary, perhaps in conjunction or pursuant to discussions on whether we need a law. I'll leave that to one side for a second. But getting them on board, because most of the information, the subversion, is actually pumped through Facebook, Twitter, and so on. So getting them on board would be, I think, very, very important. I am not sure if we need one big-ticket, grand, high-signature national anti-hoax or anti-fake news agency. The people who attempt aggressive, active measures against us use very loose, very nimble, active measures, and they have done they have done overseas for some time. And I wonder whether to fight networks, you actually need networks. I think this needs to be thought through very carefully. Perhaps today is not the day to come down on any definitive answer. But whether some of the nimbleness that the aggressor has to be parlayed into the defensive side as well. But I think this is a discussion which needs to be played out. But obviously, once you have one big ticket anti-hoax or anti-fake news agency, there will be some people who think they're problem solved, and that itself is a problem.
Would it be fair to say that, and therefore, the role of media companies and tech companies is also, or the need to engage them and they're part of the solution, is also an important one?
Absolutely, sir. So everyone now has its eyes on nations which are either promulgating or considering legislative measures. I've just come back from Germany. We had a briefing by the gentleman who drafted the fake news law in the German Justice Ministry. What was important in my view was actually not so much the law itself, which is clearly a restatement of existing legal provisions. It is a reminder to the big companies, Facebook in particular, that their community standards, as useful as they have been, are not the same as national law. And the key thing in the recent German legal saga was to emphasize to the big networks that they have to comply with national law. And that itself is very important. But the Germans did it in a very clever way, not by strong arm tactics, by engaging behind the scenes, going to the top guys, Facebook in Dublin as well. And that's very, very important, because this nuanced approach, in my view, much more calibrated, reaped bigger dividends.
Okay. And finally, just for the avoidance of doubt, so in this suite of non-legislative measures that you talk about, you're saying that there should also be some proposed legislation that comes with it.
I think it would be helpful. I think particularly when it comes to calling to account individual agencies or perhaps individuals who have done wrong, who have actively seeded subversion, or depending on how the legal discussions take place, because I'm not a lawyer, the level of accountability or culpability in terms of the big networks or platforms for wantonly purveying some of this information, which has the potential to damage the body politic. Singapore is small, as we all know, a multicultural, plural nation. We don't get second chances. To use the adage of our first-generation leaders, it's like a vase. You drop it, you can never put it back together, at least not in a manner where you think it was the same as it was before.
Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Pritam Singh?
Dr. Jayakumar, thank you so much for your contribution. My question pertains to, and it piqued my interest just now when you spoke of the German law and your discussions with the German Justice Department and their equivalent of the Ministry of Law. There is some commentary in public about concerns that tech companies, given that the law has been implemented in Germany, are over-censoring or taking a very safety-first approach in removing news which falls in a grey area, for which definitions are not so convenient and not so easy to understand. Were there any discussions about how in Germany they are trying to resolve some of these problems with such laws?
Thank you, sir. I think the sense I got from the German officials when I was there is that the law is likely here to stay. However, within the last few days, with the Merkel coalition now confirmed, there have been tweaks or attempted tweaks, which, as I understand it, may attempt to look at a couple of the points that you've just mentioned. Germany is a particular case. They're acutely aware of not just current contemporary realities when it comes to extremist content and hate speech, but also the history, the tragic history in some ways, not just in Nazi past, but fears about totalitarianism and consequent fears about censorship of content. So they're very, very careful about that. But of course, there are two sides to it. The people who are involved in drafting the fake news law are actually very happy with it, and they think it is no problem. The people, this is my understanding from the content providers, the Facebook side of the house, view this as having pushed a tremendous burden onto them. For example, my understanding is that Facebook has had to hire in the region of 1,000 fact checkers in Germany alone, and had to hire a compliance, a legal team, specifically, retained lawyers, German lawyers, specifically for the purpose of servicing this law. So, and there have been, after the law was passed, well-known and quite idiosyncratic instances of, for example, a German politician, a high-ranking politician, his name escapes me, had a tweet of his, which is several years old, and the tweet saw him calling someone from the far right an idiot. That other person he criticized had said that refugees were a potential threat to Germany. This German minister called him an idiot. The tweet got taken down. So I don't know whether this is the content provider, in this case, Twitter's example to show that, look, you're going to have all these unintended outcomes and things you didn't bargain for if you push through the law. But there has been discussion about that as well. The other well-known case is, of course, Anais Modamani, who was this Syrian refugee who took a selfie with Merkel, later banded around in far-right circles, especially those linked to the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, saying this person's responsible for terrorist attacks. He was an ISIS member. He took Facebook to court. He lost. And some of the talk in the circles there is that this is actually a reason why this law was pushed through. But of course, this is a precisely good example because it didn't matter that it was not true. It didn't matter that it was debunked. You had Sergei Lavrov, months after the Russian foreign minister, talking and criticizing Germany about this. Oh, this terrorist took a selfie with Germany. So it didn't really matter because it had already been put out there.